Hello there, welcome to my basic guide for Path of Achra. In this video, I'm going to explain all the things you need to know to start stomping and get acquainted with the game. I will go over basic mechanics, I will introduce a build that is very beginner friendly, easy to play, and it is doable with the starting resources. Because this is a classic roguelite, there's a lot of things to unlock, and basically the longer you play, the more options you got. So let's fire it up and let's start talking about what we see here. So every character that you fire up is composed out of a culture, a class, and a religion. Each of these three parts influence your gameplay quite fundamentally, as the culture gives you a few bonuses to your stats, some resistance bonuses or deficiencies, but most importantly, pretty much every race has, or culture, has its own passive effect that really does make a big difference. So the Albus that we're going to play with has a effect that he's healing himself every game turn and whenever he's praying. This is pretty beginner friendly, as it is a good pillow to rest upon to know that whenever your HP go down, you are easily back up on your feet by just kiting, because this means as long as you are running away from the enemy, eventually you heal back up. The other great cultures that you can pick here, they have all their own different thing going on for themselves. I just felt like a character that just passively heals is easy to understand, but knock yourself out and check out the other things. But one thing at a time. Next up, we got our class. This defines your starting equipment, and also they have a certain baseline thing going on for themselves. So the warrior that we're going to play is a heavily armored dude with a higher strength and dexterity, some extra life points, but most importantly, he's playing around a mechanic called poise. So as we see, we gain more poise from any source, and we generate that by just being there each turn. Poise does, that's what we see bottom line, give us more armor, block, and accuracy. So it gets removed when we step. So ideally, if we just keep standing still, we rack up more and more defensive stats. That's what this does. And this character basically evolves around utilizing this as good as you can. Same goes for all of the other character classes. They all have their own gimmick, their own starting gear, their own influences, and a fitting strategy to build around, basically. The religion that you pick is influencing your base stats and the prayers that you get. Every character has 3 prayers, and these are basically supernatural spells that you can rely on. And also, if you don't use the prayers, they work as an extra life. Basically, every prayer that is fully charged serves as a divine intervention, preventing you from dying and healing you up to a certain amount of HP back while draining the specific prayer to save your life. So you have something from your religion even if you don't even use it. We're going to use Hashem because it's a pretty easy thing. Grace is giving us a damage mitigation effect whenever we get attacked and whenever we pray. So since we're already a pretty tanky fella with regeneration abilities and stacking up defensive abilities, this guy comes in quite handy. If this is not available on your first run, I beg the forgiveness. Pick up another god. I really can't remember anymore which ones were available up front, but I think this one was. So that just as a side note, I could swear Hashem was available. But I picked this one up because he's pretty decent. At this point, I want to mention every game that you lose eventually unlocks more of these games, or either game that you win as well. So you can here check out all the different game elements, enemies, equipment, and abilities. But to begin with, I'd recommend rather to jump into the game and get overwhelmed by the game this way, rather than just trying to look up everything up front. But each to his own. If this is your kind of thing, you can look them up there. So we start out now our game, and the first map runs or is being loaded, and you always get we get to select a ability point. So we have strength, dexterity, and willpower. Strength is for tanky stuff. As you see, it gives us life, armor, and it gives us stronger capabilities in blocking, and it improves our armor. It also gives us plus hit. Hit in this game is basically equivalent to damage. Plus hit means plus damage. It also negates encumbrance, which means the stronger we are, the heavier armor we can carry. Pretty easy to understand. And it also increases the amount of speed that we can have minimal, but more about that later. Dexterity is improving dodge, block, and mostly revolving around accuracy and going fast. If you want a speedy, dodgy character, that's what dexterity is good for. And willpower is a damage amplifying stat, but it gets divided by heavy armor. Inflexibility is a side effect of heavy armor. It also amplifies healing, and it also gives you a resistance against harmful effect. It also is the stat for summoners. All in all, willpower is the classic mage stat. So if your character is not wearing heavy armor and you're revolving around a lot of magical effects, willpower is usually your stat, or summoners in the same case. Usually you will mix in the typical scenario with strength with some dexterity, or willpower with some dexterity. Sometimes you can go mono strength. It really depends on your path. And last but not least, you can also increase your maximum life and heal yourself. So this is situational. Most of the time you don't want to pick that because you want those permanent stat increases. But before you die, when you're in a pickle and all of a sudden you can't heal yourself and cleanse yourself, comes in quite handy at times. But the real strategical value of that is it increases your baseline health a lot more, and some builds revolve around a stupidly high HP pool, and then this might be the stat for you. We are picking up strength because for the tanky guy that we are building, that's just the right thing. So this is the map that we're running around. You can control your character with the mouse by left clicking. You can search for the next best enemy by pressing tab, or you use the numpad to navigate around. Just make sure numlock is on. So we have here our first enemy in front of us. We can check out their stats and their name and everything. That. To kill stuff, we just walk on the square where they're standing, bump into them, and start whacking. Over here, we see our maximum HP. If it reaches 0, we die. You also can see how many divine interventions you have here in form of Ankh symbols. We have here our prayers and what they do. Our baseline prayer just heals us and recharges when we enter new areas. Recharging processes are completely different for every god, so the most important thing though is to note that you will learn these when you gather glory. Glory is gained by just leveling up and proceeding, so basically means the prayers unlock successively the longer you play. Now, we have here our inventory screen, reachable with the hotkey I, and here we see all our stats galore, and I explained the stats, the baseline stats already. I want to talk about this stuff real quick. So I already talked about life. Here's speed. So speed makes you faster. Speed is lowered by encumbrance that is exceeding your strength. So basically we have currently here, as you see, a encumbrance of 22. And we therefore need a strength of 22 to start not being impeded in terms of our strength anymore by our gear. So basically, if you want to make a fast character, you need to put on lightweight gear, or you are stupidly strong, or both. Works either way. But what's important is, if you are speed 5, then you can move one tile and a game turn will pass. The more speed you have, the more actions you get before a game turn passes. So in a nutshell, that means our character already gets to move a square and then some before a game turn passes. That is why speed is a insanely valuable stat. Now, this is our resistances. I think this goes without saying. Improves the amount of damage if you are negative and decreases the amount of damage you take if it is positive. You get everything here explained. Game has a lot of different damage sources, doesn't it? So, defensive stats. Dodging entirely negates an enemy's attack if your dodge rating is higher than his accuracy rating, and if you manage to get another roll that succeeds in the dodging rule, because as you see here, there is a permanent 10% chance to fail, if I understood that correctly. So that means dodging is never perfect, but it does mitigate the attack entirely if you can dodge it. Gets increased by dex and by it's decreased by encumbrance. That is again exceeding strength. So encumbrance is not per se making dodging impossible. You just need to be bulkier enough to pull it off. I love this, by the way. So blocking is reducing the enemy's hit, and if your block is higher than the enemy's hit rating, you block the attack. Gets increased by dexterity and strength and all manner of different things, and is one hell of a good way of mitigating enemy damage. And then we got armor, which again checks if it is higher than the enemy's hit score, and if so, you're shrugging off the attack, which means basically you can easily take no damage whatsoever if your defensive stats here are high enough. Okay, the last thing that I didn't cover is inflexibility. So inflexibility is inflicted by heavy armor. It does divide the willpower damage bonus. It does divide speed, so inflexibility really does cut your speed down severely. And magical damage, by the way, produced by high willpower, but most importantly, it also increases your block, because you happen to be better able to block if you're clad in heavy armor. So that's the stat. Inflexibility is good for tanks, bad for dodgy characters and mages. That's the gist of it. Weapon size is only influencing sometimes certain spells and abilities. It does not hamper you to have a huge weapon size at all. There's no negative impediment by that. Down here we see the passive effects that are currently influencing us and our gear. I will go over the gear in a hot minute. So now let's start killing some people. And as we see here, we are gaining up there a couple of extra effects. So that's our poise, and that is the grace that we're racking up. These two stats serve us well. I want to show you here one thing, these bars down below. So the green bar is the turn bar. It shows how much time is left until the next turn happens. So I go now this way. And as you see there, a new turn is happening when I act this time next. So if you have a lot of speed, you can see when the game will fire off the next turn. So you can time your effects like that. Okay, we have killed off the enemy. If you press tab now, you zoom to the portal. And this way you can now slaughter yourself through the areas here. But we're not done there. We have powers. So here's the power screen. The most overwhelming piece of things in the game ever. You have different schools. Each column is a different school. So this is martial and fire and so on and so forth. I strongly suggest you to just pick up 2 different schools and mix and match the skills together according to your taste. There's also prestige classes happening when you are high enough in certain ranks. So here, for example, you see a class that happens when you have 25 points divided between ice and poison. And there's a lot of different of these classes, and I can only say each and every one of them is absolutely worth going for it. And the moment you have it, you should really adapt your build around it, or you do it before you. Well, either way, focusing on 2 schools allows you to always pick up some random prestige class. If you don't know what you're doing, this will yield you a lot of fun, promise. And you could also just mono one talent, but whatever you do, don't spread across the trees. That is one foolproof way to get yourself into some non-effective mush. Okay, so for this build, we're going to stay to the martial element and the blood element, because these make a pretty decent and nice tank. Everything else is doable, just mix and match to your own liking. So the game now features a ton of different skills. We're, for example, working here with heavyweight. Heavyweight increases our armor on every account, but also increases our encumbrance. So that means we're never going to be able to do good dodging, but we don't want to do this. The most important thing is, when we shrug off an attack, we will now deal damage due to the shrug off. So that is a new effect. And the shrug off is stronger the more encumbrance we got, and the higher we level up the skill. So this is one heck of a good way to make sure that our armor hurts back. So guard now does a similar thing. It boosts up block, and whenever we manage to block, we perform a counterattack. I like that. It's a very good thing for a tanky build, don't you think? And last but not least, we are now going to pick up Stand Ground, which does, whenever we stand still, perform attacks on the enemy, and we apply poise to ourselves. So this is highly synergistic with our character class. So our character is now basically able to hurt enemies by just standing next to them without doing anything. So we're going to save up our ability points now because we want to learn other blood skills first. So we move now up front there, and we just now can press the space bar instead of tab. So you move up front to them, and then you press spacebar to pass the turn. Because our character now is strongest when he's not acting at all, because then we attack with the stand still effects. So that's pretty nifty. Here we go. By the way, here we get our first loot. You can always check out what kind of enemies are on the current realm here on this sidebar. And it really pays off. For one, the lore of this game is really worth reading, and for another point, you can check out what the enemy's effects do. You now know what all the stats mean, and so on, you should be now able to understand what these abilities do. So, when we leave the map, we now get to select where we go to next. We also can preview the treasures there. Now I want to head back to my inventory screen. You see, our baseline gear is very, very basic. The most of our gear does only give us base stats and some encumbrance. That's that. But there are items, and most items in this game work differently. So as you see here, the golden sword gives us a couple of stats, and it has a certain mechanic that works around the inflame stat. Not too interesting for us because we are not working with inflame at all. By the way, that's a fire magic thing. And here we have a burning mask which synergizes around scorch mechanics. Well, not exactly our cup of tea, but you can now check out on this preview what kind of items show up and what will synergize with your build or not. If you don't find anything that looks appealing, there is another thing worth noting, and that is every piece of gear can be sacrificed to make your current worn gear stronger. So that means no gear is ever not worth picking up, because in the worst case scenario, we will boost up your character with that. So if you don't see anything appealing, try to take the path with the most loot. You can always check out the enemies up front, and you can always check out the enemy's skills and composure, and, well, you will get busted if you just run into the next best combat like that, but it is also fun to get busted like that. So what I'm trying to get down to is you can play this game very in a very cerebral manner and prepare yourself decently, or you can just run in guns blazing and look for a good combo with your build and hope for a wacky combo that carries you through the game. Either way works. The first method works a little bit more reliably, but the latter is more fun. So, our build now will go into the blood path. Blood will apply bleed to the enemy on many, many different instances. We are most interested in the combo of bloodbath. So whenever we deal blood damage to an enemy, we will heal ourselves. And whenever we get dealt damage, we will deal blood damage back. That's a really, really nice combination for us. So we're going to pick up now, let's see, hemokinesis. Whenever we hit, we apply bleed. And whenever we apply bleed, we apply more bleed. This is a very, very nice skill, very cost-effective, cheap, and does a lot of things. Let me show you. So there we go. And now we're starting to apply bleed, which does not only heal us once we learn the next skill, but it'll also whittle down the enemy. And just like that, you will continue doing your things. And congratulations, you now pretty much know how to play Path of Achra. The amount of combinations in the game is mind-boggling. The build that I introduced here has still 2 slots open. I'll leave it up to you how you want to play it, or you go a completely different path. As the last thing before I leave you, I just want to summarize. You want on your build some sort of a defensive mechanic that keeps you alive, either by healing you or making you stupidly tanky. You want something to hurt your enemies with, preferably some mechanic that can grow stronger the longer the battle goes, especially items that give you stacks that increase your hit or something like that the longer you fight are excellent, as these will give you the fighting power if the enemy is very tanky. And last but not least, you should always try and look for utilities that cleanse negative effects off of you, because every build has some sort of negative effects that totally bust them. For example, this build can be nigh invincible once your armor ratings are high enough and your block ratings, but there's corrosion. Corrosion, the more stacks you gather of it, the lower your protection values go. And you even get some extra fire damage on top of that. Boom. Your entire invincibility crumbles apart by just one debuff. So what this boils down to is you should always check out what the enemy is up to and find out by trial and error what the weaknesses of your builds are. So at the end of the road, you will have to reach this thing. There are always more rewarding paths than others, and I'll leave the rest up to you. So, drop me your comments down below. Let me know what kind of guides you'd like to see about this game still. I am all ears. Leave a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and check out the stuff in the description box. I'd be super happy if you did. Big thanks to all the supporters of Icon Gaming. You guys rock. And a big thanks to you for watching this video. You rock. See you soon. Bye-bye.